The screaming on the other end of the sat phone was somehow louder than the mortar alarms going off behind me. It wasn't the enemy, though. It was my pregnant tenant, absolutely hysterical, crying that the HOA president was on my front porch trying to physically throw her out of the house. My house, and I was stuck in the dirt on the other side of the planet. It's funny, you know, the things you think about when you're deployed. You'd assume it's all big picture stuff, mission objectives, the guys to your left and right, the bigger meaning of it all. And yeah, there's that. But mostly your mind drifts to small things. The taste of a real burger, the feeling of rain that isn't 90% sand, or in my case, the smell of the fresh cut grass in my own backyard. That house, it wasn't just some property investment. For a guy like me who'd spent his entire adult life bouncing from one military base to another, that house was the anchor I'd never had. It was the first thing that was truly mine. I bought it 2 years ago after re-upping my contract. The bonus wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style place in a quiet little subdivision called Liberty Orchards. The name was a bit cheesy, but the streets were lined with oak trees and the neighbors seemed at first glance like the kind of people who'd bring you your mail if you were out of town. I remember the day I got the keys. I didn't even move my stuff in right away. I just walked through the empty rooms, the sound of my boots echoing on the hardwood floors. I ran my hand along the cool granite of the kitchen countertop. I stood in the backyard, which wasn't much more than a patch of decent-looking lawn and a single sturdy-looking maple tree, and I just breathed. For the first time since I left home for basic training, I felt like I had a piece of the country I was serving. It was my square on the map, my fortress of solitude. Over the next year, I poured every spare weekend and every extra dollar into that place. I painted the rooms myself, a calm, neutral gray that the guy at Home Depot swore would help with resale value, but which I just found peaceful. I learned more about lawn care than I ever thought possible, waging a one-man war against crabgrass. I even built a small wooden deck off the back porch, a place where I could sit in the evenings with a cold beer and watch the sun go down. It was perfect. And then there was Karen. My first real interaction with her happened about 6 months in. I'd just finished laying down new sod, a project that had cost me a small fortune and a weekend of back-breaking labor. I was admiring my handiwork when I saw her. She was a woman in her mid-50s with that very specific helmet-like haircut and a look of perpetual disapproval etched onto her face. She was walking a small, yappy white dog, the kind that looks like a dust bunny with anxiety issues. The dog, off its leash, trotted right onto my pristine new lawn and, well, it did its business. I'm not a confrontational guy. I walked over, put on my most disarming smile, and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I just put this lawn in. Would you mind keeping your dog off of it, please?" I even held out one of the little plastic bags I kept by the door for just such an occasion. "Here, I've got a bag for you." She looked at my hand, then at me as if I'd just offered her a live grenade. The temperature on my lawn seemed to drop about 20 degrees. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, she said, her voice dripping with ice. "We've never had a problem with neighborly pets." "I'm not trying to be unneighborly," I said, my smile starting to feel a little strained. "I'd just really appreciate it if you'd keep him off the new grass. It needs time to take root." She didn't take the bag. She just yanked the dog's invisible leash, pulling it away with a sharp, "Come, Fifi," and marched off, nose in the air. She never looked back. I stood there, plastic bag in hand, and thought, well, that was weird. I had no idea that I'd just made a mortal enemy. I'd forgotten about it by dinner. She apparently did not. A year later, my deployment orders came through. A full year. The thought of leaving the house empty, a target for vandals, or just falling into disrepair made me sick. Plus, there was the mortgage, so I decided to rent it out. I went through a property management company, did everything by the book. They vetted a dozen applicants, and we landed on the Millers. They were perfect. Tom was a medical resident at the local hospital, and his wife, Emily, taught second grade. They were quiet, responsible, and expecting their first child. They loved the house, loved the yard, and even complimented my deck. During the walkthrough, Tom shook my hand and said, "We'll take care of it like it's our own, Captain Riley. Thank you for your service." They were the kind of people you want living in your house, the kind of people you want as neighbors. I signed the lease with them, handed the keys over to my property manager, and packed my bags. The day I left, I took one last look at the house. The lawn was green, the windows were clean, and there was a small, tasteful welcome mat on the porch that Emily had put out. It looked happy. It felt secure. I left for my deployment feeling that, at least back home, everything was in order. I had a fortress, and I had good people holding the fort. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first month of a deployment is a strange mix of chaos and monotony. You're adjusting to the rhythm of the base, the heat, the constant low-level hum of machinery and tension. Your world shrinks down to your bunk, the chow hall, the gym, and your duty station. Mail from home, when it comes, feels like a dispatch from another planet. Most of the time, I was too busy or too tired to think much about Liberty Orchards. I'd get the occasional email from my property manager, Mark. Just simple updates, rent paid on time, no issues to report. It was exactly what I wanted to see. Everything was running on autopilot, just like I'd planned. The first hint of trouble arrived not as a bang, but as a PDF attachment. In an email, with the subject line, FWD Liberty Orchards Monthly Newsletter. It was from Mark. The body of the email just said, "Figured you should see this? Let me know if you want me to do anything." I remember I was in the MWR tent, Morale, Welfare, and Recreation, which was really just a big, air-conditioned tent with a few beat-up couches and a painfully slow satellite internet connection. It took forever for the file to download. I almost gave up, but something made me wait. The newsletter popped up on my screen. It was 2 pages, done up in a cheerful-looking template with little clip-art oak trees. And right there, at the top of the first page, was a photo of a smiling woman, a cold, reptilian smile that didn't reach her eyes. Karen Peters. Underneath the photo, it said, "A message from your new HOA president." My stomach did a little flip-flop. I didn't even know there were elections happening. The previous president was some retired guy who mostly just cared about the community pool's pH levels. Karen, though. Karen as president felt different. It felt intentional. I started reading her President's Corner. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive warfare. She went on and on about community values and maintaining the aesthetic and financial integrity of our wonderful neighborhood. All standard HOA fluff until I got to the 3rd paragraph. As we welcome new faces and see others depart for temporary assignments, she wrote, "We must remain vigilant in upholding the standards that make Liberty Orchards a premier community. Homeownership is a commitment, not just to a piece of property, but to the neighborhood itself. When that commitment is delegated, we run the risk of seeing a decline in the personal pride that keeps our lawns green, our streets clean, and our property values high. It is the board's firm position that our community is at its strongest when every home is occupied by a long-term, invested stakeholder." She never used the word renter. She never used my name or the Millers' names, but she didn't have to. Every word was aimed directly at me. Temporary assignments, delegated commitment, not an invested stakeholder. She was painting a target on my house. She was laying the groundwork, seeding the idea in my neighbors' minds that my tenants, a doctor and a school teacher, for God's sake, were some kind of threat to their way of life. I leaned back in the creaky chair, the hum of the AC unit filling the silence. I felt a surge of hot, pure irritation. This was all because I asked her to pick up her dog's crap. This woman had held on to that grudge for over a year, waited until I was out of the country, got herself elected president of a glorified neighborhood watch, and was now using her newfound power to launch a crusade against me. It was so incredibly, unbelievably petty that I almost had to laugh. Almost, but underneath the annoyance there was a little knot of concern. This wasn't just some cranky neighbor anymore. This was the president of the HOA. She had official channels. She could make life difficult. I typed out a reply to Mark. The connection was so slow that each letter appeared on the screen a full second after I typed it. "Mark, thanks for the heads up. Looks like the new HOA president has a personal issue with me. Just do me a favor and make sure the Millers are being model citizens, okay? Keep the lawn perfect, trash cans in on time, the whole 9 yards. Let's not give her any ammunition." He replied a few hours later. "You got it, Jake. I'll stay on top of it. Probably just some old biddy on a power trip. I wouldn't worry about it." And that's what I did. I didn't worry about it. I closed the laptop, pushed the whole ridiculous situation out of my mind, and went back to my real job. I had actual problems to deal with, life and death situations that required my full attention. I figured Karen would write another snotty newsletter, maybe make a few passive-aggressive comments, and eventually get bored. It was a profound miscalculation. I thought I was dealing with a neighborhood nuisance. I was actually dealing with an enemy commander who had just declared war, and I had just ignored her opening salvo. If I thought the newsletter was the end of it, I was a fool. That was just the opening shot, the rangefinder. The real artillery barrage started a few weeks later. It began with another email from Mark. This time, the subject was urgent HOA bylaw amendment. He explained that Karen had called a special session to vote on a new rule. The turnout was apparently abysmal. Less than a quarter of the homeowners showed up, but it was enough for a quorum. They passed a new amendment to the community covenants. Mark attached the scan. My blood ran cold as I read it. The language was dense and full of legalese, but the intent was as subtle as a punch to the jaw. It effectively banned any new rental agreements for periods shorter than 2 years. But the real poison was in the fine print. It required the legal homeowner to be physically present for an in-person interview with the HOA board before any tenants could be approved. And this was the part that made me feel like I was going to be sick. It contained a clause that gave the board the power to review and recertify any existing rental agreements to ensure they comply with the new community standards. It was a weapon built for one purpose, to target me. It was designed to be impossible for me to comply with. I couldn't exactly take a long weekend from a war zone to come home for an interview with a woman who hated me. I called Mark on a spotty VoIP connection. "This is insane," I said, my voice tight. "This can't be legal, can it? Applying a new rule retroactively?" "Honestly, Jake, it's a legal gray area," he said, sounding tired. "It's shaky as hell, but to fight it, you'd have to take them to court. It's expensive and it takes time. They know that. They know you're deployed." He was right. Karen wasn't just using the rules, she was using my own service against me. She was using my deployment as a weapon. Then the fines started. They came in a steady drip, an email from Mark every week or so with another scanned violation notice. Each one was a little paper cut designed to bleed me slow. The first was a $50 fine for improper storage of a refuse container. The Millers had apparently left their trash can at the curb for 3 hours after the truck had passed. The notice included a time-stamped photo. Karen had been watching my house. A week later, another $100. Unauthorized landscape alteration. Emily, who loved to garden, had put in a small, neat little vegetable planter in a sunny spot in the backyard. It wasn't visible from the street. Karen must have walked around to the back of my property to see it. The thought of her snooping around my sanctuary, my private space, made my skin crawl. The fines got more and more brazen. $200 for a potential chemical stain. On the driveway, a small, dark patch on the concrete that could have been anything. The notice said it needed to be professionally remediated within 14 days. With every fine, I had Mark pay it out of the rental income. I told myself it was just the cost of doing business, the cost of dealing with a crazy person. But it wasn't about the money, it was about the feeling of absolute powerlessness. I was a captain in the United States Army, responsible for the lives of my soldiers and millions of dollars in equipment, but I couldn't stop a woman in a golf cart from harassing my tenants and bleeding me dry from half a world away. The stress started to get to me. It was a constant low-level hum of anxiety in the back of my mind. During briefings, I'd find my thoughts drifting to HOA bylaws. On patrol, I'd be thinking about driveway stains. It was absurd. The final straw, before everything truly exploded, came in a phone call from a very shaken Tom Miller. Mark patched him through to me. "Captain Riley, I am so sorry to bother you," he began, his voice strained. "But it's getting bad. This woman, Karen, she's harassing Emily." He told me that Karen had taken to patrolling our street in her golf cart several times a day. She would slow down to a crawl in front of my house, just staring. A few days ago, she'd seen Emily, who was now very visibly pregnant, watering the flowers on the porch. Karen stopped her cart in the middle of the road, pulled out her phone, and started taking pictures of her. Of my tenant, a pregnant woman. "What did you do?" I asked, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "I went out and asked her what the hell she thought she was doing," Tom said. "She didn't even flinch. She just told me she was documenting potential violations for the board. She told Emily that her excessive watering was causing moisture damage to the porch columns." "It's insane, Captain. Emily came inside and just broke down. She's afraid to even sit outside anymore." That was it. The line had been crossed. This was no longer about bylaws and fines. This was about a bully terrorizing a young family living in my home. I told Tom I would handle it. I immediately called Mark and told him to hire a lawyer. "I don't care what it costs," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Find someone to send a cease and desist letter. Shut this down. Now." Mark agreed, his voice grim. But it was too late. We were playing checkers while Karen was playing chess. We thought the next step was a lawyer's letter. Her next step was a tactical nuke. 2 days later, Mark called me again. I knew from the tone of his first word, Jake ... that this was bad. "I got a certified letter from an attorney's office," he said. "It's from the law firm representing the HOA. He read it to me over the phone. It was a formal notice to quit. It stated that pursuant to the new bylaw amendment, my property was in violation of community covenants. It declared my legally signed lease with the Millers to be null and void. It gave them 30 days to vacate the premises. If they didn't, the HOA would begin formal eviction proceedings, place a lien on my house to cover all associated legal fees, their fees and mine, and would pursue all available remedies, including wage garnishment." I listened in stunned silence. The background noise of the bass faded away. A lien, eviction, wage garnishment. These were words that could ruin a person, ruin a soldier's career. It was a declaration of total war. And then, before I could even process the letter, before I could formulate a plan, before Mark's newly hired lawyer could even draft a response, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't wait for the legal process. She wanted them out, and she wanted it now. That's when the call came. That's when I heard the screaming. After that call, the one with Emily's terrified sobs on the line, something inside me snapped into place. It was the same feeling I get right before a mission goes live. The noise fades, the chaos settles, and your training takes over. You compartmentalize. You analyze the threat. You formulate a plan. My immediate objective was simple: de-escalate the situation on the ground and reassure my people. "Emily," I said, forcing my voice to be calm and steady, a voice of command. "Listen to me. Do not open the door. Do not engage with her. She has zero legal authority to make you leave. None. Your lease is a legally binding contract. Do you understand?" I could hear her taking a shaky breath. "Yes, Captain." "Good. Now, put Tom on the phone if he's there." "He wasn't. He was still at the hospital." "Okay, just stay inside. I'm going to handle this. This is my fight, not yours. You are safe in that house." I don't know if I was convincing, but I said it with enough authority that she seemed to calm down a little. As soon as I hung up, I was on the line with Mark, my property manager. I gave him a direct order: "Get over to my house. Now your job is to be the physical barrier between that woman and my tenants. Do not be aggressive, but be firm. Tell her to direct all communication to you or the lawyer. Then call the police and report a trespasser creating a disturbance." My brain was running 1,000 miles an hour. This was a multi-front war, and I was fighting it by remote control. The next step was the lawyer Mark had hired. I got his name and number and spent a small fortune on satellite minutes calling him directly from the base. His name was Mr. Henderson, and he had the kind of calm, reedy voice that you'd think would be reassuring, but it just made me more anxious. He sounded slow. "Yes, Captain Riley," he said after I'd given him the frantic, condensed version of events. "This is, of course, a highly irregular and aggressive action by the HOA, highly improper. I will draft a strongly worded cease and desist letter and have it messengered to Ms. Peters and the HOA's legal counsel immediately." "A letter?" I said, trying to keep the disbelief out of my voice. "A letter? She's on my porch screaming at a pregnant woman. Don't we need an emergency injunction, a restraining order?" "Well, those are certainly options down the line," Henderson said placidly. "But we must follow procedure. The first step is to put them on formal notice. It establishes a paper trail." A paper trail. I was in a firefight, and my lawyer wanted to start a paper trail. For the next 2 weeks, that's exactly what we did. Henderson sent his strongly worded letter. The HOA's lawyer, a shark from some slick downtown firm, sent a response that basically said my lease was invalid and my tenants were trespassing. Henderson sent another letter refuting their claims. They sent one back, doubling down. With every exchange, I got an email from Henderson's office with a summary, and at the bottom, a running tally of his billable hours. I was spending hundreds, then thousands of dollars for 2 lawyers to posture at each other through the mail while Karen continued her reign of terror. Mark told me she'd backed off from screaming on the porch, but her harassment just became more insidious. She'd park her golf cart at the edge of my property line, just sitting there, watching. She'd take pictures of the mailman delivering my mail. She filed a formal complaint that the Miller's car, a perfectly normal Toyota Camry, was an unapproved commercial vehicle because Tom was a doctor. The fine was $500. I realized I couldn't just fight through Henderson. I had to try to reason with the system itself. I had Mark dig up the names and email addresses of the other 2 members of the HOA board, a treasurer and a secretary. I spent an entire evening crafting a careful, respectful email. I introduced myself, explained my military service and my deployment. I detailed the impeccable record of my tenants. I laid out the escalating and targeted harassment they were facing from President Peters. I appealed to their sense of decency, of patriotism. I ended it by saying, "I'm just asking for you to be reasonable and to stop your president from this personal vendetta while I am deployed in service to our country." I hit send and felt a small flicker of hope. These were my neighbors, after all. They couldn't all be like her. The treasurer, a guy named Bob, replied within a day. His email was 2 sentences long. "Thank you for your email. The board will take your concerns under advisement." The secretary never replied at all. My hope died. They weren't going to help me. They were either terrified of Karen or they were complicit. She had total control. My last resort for a peaceful solution was the one place I probably should have gone first, the military's own legal services. I made an appointment with the base JAG office. The lawyer I met was a sharp young captain who listened intently, nodding as I laid out the whole sordid story. When I finished, he leaned back. "Captain, what you're describing is a clear-cut case of targeted harassment," he said, "and Ms. Peters' actions, especially trying to enforce a new bylaw on an existing lease while you're deployed, almost certainly bumps up against the Service Members Civil Relief Act, the SCRA." Hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. "So you can help? You can stop her?" He gave me a sympathetic look. "I can advise you," he said, and my heart sank. "I can give you all the information on the SCRA. I can help you draft letters to your creditors or the court explaining your protected status. But I can't represent you in a civilian legal action in your home state. My jurisdiction ends at the gate of this base. You'll still need a civilian attorney to actually file a lawsuit or an injunction." He handed me a thick packet of documents about the SCRA. It was a shield, a powerful one, but I had no one back home to wield it for me. Henderson, my slow-moving, letter-writing lawyer, probably wouldn't know what to do with it. The final nail in the coffin of my peaceful attempts came a week later. In an act of pure spite, Karen had convinced the HOA's landscaping company that there was a major leak in my sprinkler system and that they needed to shut the water off at the valve to prevent community water waste. The Millers woke up to a dead lawn and no water for their garden. Tom, at the end of his rope, called the police. An hour later, I got a call from a defeated-sounding Tom. The police had come. An officer had listened to his story, then went and talked to Karen. He came back and shrugged. He told me, "Sir, she's the HOA president, and she says it's an emergency maintenance issue. This is a civil matter. You'll have to take it up with the HOA or take them to court." He left, Jake. He just left. And that was it. That was the moment I truly understood. I had done everything right. I had hired a lawyer. I had appealed to the board. I had consulted my own legal services. I had involved law enforcement. And every single door had been slammed in my face. The system wasn't just failing me, it felt like it was actively working against me. I was trapped, fighting a ghost from the other side of the world, and I was losing. Badly. I was done. I'd hit the wall, and I'd hit it hard. I spent a couple of days in a dark haze, just going through the motions of my job, the weight of the whole situation crushing me. Every option had been exhausted. Every door had been slammed shut. The thought of selling the house, my house, was no longer a panicked last resort. It was starting to sound like a relief. It felt like amputation, cutting off a part of myself to stop the poison from spreading. I was drafting an email to Mark in my head, telling him to just list the place and get it over with, when Master Sergeant Davis walked into the common area. Davis was my platoon sergeant. He was a man carved out of oak and institutional knowledge, with salt and pepper hair and forearms covered in faded tattoos from a career that started back when I was in middle school. He could tell if a soldier was having a bad day from 100 yards away just by the way they tied their boots. He walked over, grabbed a cup of the thick, sludgy coffee we all ran on, and sat down across from me at the wobbly table. "You look like you're about 10 seconds from field stripping your own head, Captain," he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just waited. And for the first time, I let it all out. I told him everything. The house, the dog poop, Karen's promotion, the newsletter, the fines, the harassment of the Millers, the fake violations, the eviction notice. I told him about the useless lawyer billing me into oblivion, the silent board, the powerless police, the whole sordid 9-month nightmare. I finished by tossing the thick packet the JAG lawyer had given me onto the table. It landed with a dull thud. "JAG even gave me this," I said, my voice flat with defeat. "The Service Members Civil Relief Act. Supposedly my big federal protection. A whole lot of good it does me. It's a shield, but I've got no one to hold it. It's just paper." Davis didn't say anything at first. He just reached out, picked up the packet, and started flipping through the pages. He wasn't speed reading. He was scanning it with a practiced eye, like a man who'd seen paperwork like this before. He stopped on a page, his finger tracing a line. He was quiet for a long moment. "Captain," he said, finally looking up at me. His eyes weren't full of pity, they were sharp, focused. "This lawyer you got back home, this Henderson fella, did he actually read this? All of it?" "I doubt it," I grumbled. "He probably just knows the basics. You know, you can't be evicted without a court order. You can get a stay on proceedings. The stuff everyone knows." Davis shook his head slowly, a grim little smile playing on his lips. "Yeah, that's the shield part. Everyone knows the shield, but they always forget that this thing has a sword, too. a big, nasty one. He turned the packet around and slid it back across the table to me, his finger pointing to a specific section. Did Henderson ever mention Section 3952 to you? I leaned forward and read the title, Enforcement of Rights. I skimmed the dense legal text, but Davis broke it down for me in plain English. What that says, sir, he began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, is that if any person or entity knowingly messes with your rights under the CCRA, you can sue the ever-living hell out of them in federal court. He tapped the paper, and it says any person. That doesn't just mean the HOA is a faceless board. That means the board members. That means your President Karen, personally. I stared at him, my mind struggling to catch up. Sue them? That's not even the best part, he said, leaning in closer. The best part is right here. He pointed to another paragraph. It says that if you win, the court must order them to pay your attorney's fees. All of them. And on top of that, the court can award punitive damages. It's not just a law that says be nice to soldiers. It's a law that puts a financial bounty on the head of anyone who knowingly screws one over. The words hit me like a jolt of pure adrenaline. Knowingly. That was the key. My polite emails to the board, my official notifications of my deployment status. They all knew. Henderson's letters, as useless as they were, had put them on formal notice. They knew I was a deployed soldier. Everything they did after that, they did knowingly. It was like a switch had been flipped in a dark room. The entire dynamic of the conflict, the entire shape of the battlefield, had just changed. I wasn't a helpless victim begging for the system to save me. I wasn't on the defensive anymore. I was a plaintiff. I had a federal cause of action. I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was fighting a case of illegal discrimination against a protected class. And the law wasn't just a shield to hide behind. It was a weapon, forged and waiting. I looked down at the packet. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was a plan of attack. Master Sergeant, I said, a slow, wide grin spreading across my face for the first time in months. Buy you a beer when we get back stateside? He just chuckled. Just win the war, sir. Just win the war. The days following my conversation with Master Sergeant Davis were like waking up from a long, feverish dream. The fog of despair was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The helplessness that had been my constant companion had evaporated, and in its place was a feeling I knew well. Purpose. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a soldier with a mission, and I finally had a viable strategy. The first order of business was to cut the dead weight. I sent a short, professional email to Mr. Henderson, thanking him for his time and informing him that his services were no longer required. I asked him to send me his final, no doubt exorbitant bill and to forward my complete case file to a new address. The feeling of hitting's end on that email was one of the most satisfying moments of the entire ordeal. My next step was to find the right weapon. The JAG captain had given me more than just the SCRA packet. He'd given me a list of civilian law firms that specialized in military cases. At the top of the list with a star next to it was a firm called Patriot Legal. Their website was no nonsense, all business, filled with testimonials from service members they'd helped. I put in a request through their online portal, and within hours I got an email back, not from a paralegal, but from a senior partner. Her name was Amelia Voss. We scheduled a call for the next day. The moment she started talking, I knew she was the polar opposite of Henderson. There was no placid hemming and hawing. Her voice was pure energy, sharp and focused, firing questions at me like a drill instructor. Captain Riley, Amelia Voss, I've read your summary. Let's cut to the chase. Did you notify the HOA of your deployed status in writing? Yes, ma'am, multiple times. And they continued to levy fines and issue notices after this notification? Yes, they escalated. Did their communications ever acknowledge your status? The board treasurer did, in an email. Perfect, she said, and I could practically hear her smile. That establishes knowing violation. What about your tenants? Have they kept any records of the harassment? Some. They're pretty shaken up. They're about to get unshaken, Amelia said with a confidence that sent a jolt of electricity through me. Captain, this isn't just a strong case. This is a textbook example of what the enforcement provision of the SCRA was written for. This isn't just a cease and desist. This is a federal lawsuit. We're not just going to get them to back off. We're going to make them pay for every second of stress they've caused you and that family. For the first time in almost a year, I felt like I had air support. Amelia wasn't just my lawyer, she was my wingman. The plan formulated over the next 2 weeks through a series of secure emails and carefully timed calls across 9 time zones. It was a full-blown counterintelligence operation. Amelia was our commander. I was her forward operating officer, and Mark and the Millers became my intelligence gathering team on the ground. I got them all on a conference call with Amelia. I'll never forget the change in Tom and Emily's voices over the course of that hour. They started out sounding timid and exhausted, like victims. By the end, after Amelia had laid out the battle plan and explained how the law was unequivocally on our side, their voices were firm, resolved. The fear was gone, replaced by determination. "So, what do you need from us?" Tom asked, and for the first time he sounded like the confident doctor he was. Amelia gave them their mission. "I need everything," she said. "A detailed timeline. Write down every single interaction you've had with Karen Peters or any other board member. Every conversation, every nasty look, every time she parked her golf cart outside your house. Dates, times, what was said. No detail is too small. Tom, Emily, you are my star witnesses. Your testimony is what will show a jury the human cost of their actions." The floodgates opened. For the next week, my inbox was flooded with documents. Mark sent scans of every fine, every newsletter, every threatening letter from the HOA's lawyer. Jake sent me his own email correspondence, and the Millers, they produced a masterpiece, a 10-page, single-spaced document that chronicled their 9 months of psychological torment with meticulous, heartbreaking detail. Emily remembered the exact condescending phrase Karen used when talking about her vegetable garden: "We don't want the neighborhood looking like a migrant farm camp, dear." Tom had a log of every time he'd had to leave the hospital to rush home because Emily was in a panic. It was a damning indictment. As I read through it all in my bunk at night, my righteous anger grew into a cold, hard resolve. Our strategy was two-pronged. Phase 1 was legal. Amelia drafted a sprawling, 40-page federal complaint. It didn't just name the Liberty Orchards HOA, it named Karen Peters, Bob the treasurer, and the silent secretary as individual defendants. Amelia explained that we were going to pierce the corporate veil, arguing that their actions were so egregious and so far outside the scope of their duties that they were personally liable. The lawsuit demanded not only the reversal of all fines and a permanent injunction against the HOA, but also compensatory damages for my financial losses and the Millers' emotional distress, plus massive punitive damages to punish them for their deliberate violation of federal law. Phase 2 was information warfare. "Once we file, they'll know we're serious," Amelia explained on one of our calls, "but they won't understand the storm that's coming. We hold the story for the media in our back pocket. We hit them with the legal complaint first. We let them see the full extent of their mistake. Then, at a moment of our choosing, we go public. We control the narrative." It was brilliant. It was aggressive. It was perfect. 2 weeks after that first call with Amelia, everything was in place. The evidence was compiled, the witness statements were prepared, and the lawsuit was ready to file. The final call came late one night, my time. It was Amelia. "Jake," she said, her voice devoid of any previous cheer, now purely professional. "It's ready. I've reviewed every piece of evidence. The complaint is locked and loaded. It's one of the strongest SCRA cases I've ever seen. They have no idea what's about to hit them. I just need one thing from you." "What's that?" I asked, looking out the window of my small room at the dusty, moonlit expanse of the desert. "The green light," she said. "Just give me the word, Captain." I thought about Emily's terrified sobs on the phone. I thought about Tom's exhausted voice. I thought about the stack of bogus fines and the smug, icy face of Karen Peters. "Light them up, counselor," I said. "Light them all up. You know that moment in a movie, right before the charge? When the good guys are on the ridge, the plan is set, the signal is given, and there's that 1 second of dead, absolute silence before the storm breaks? That's what it felt like after I gave Amelia the green light. For a few days, nothing happened. The silence was deafening. I was on edge, checking my email every 5 minutes, my stomach in knots. I had launched a missile from halfway across the world, and I had no idea if it had hit its target. The confirmation came in an email from Amelia with the subject line, "Splash." Attached were copies of the affidavits of service. A legal process server had personally delivered our 40-page declaration of war to the HOA's law firm, and then separately to Karen Peters, Bob the treasurer, and the silent secretary at their homes. I stared at the photo of the lawsuit sitting on Karen's front porch, right next to the little welcome mat where she'd left that first eviction notice. The symmetry was beautiful. The first shot had been fired, and it was a direct hit. I expected a frantic, immediate reaction, a panicked offer to settle, but I had underestimated their arrogance. For about a week, all we got was silence. Then their countermove came. It wasn't an olive branch, it was a slap in the face. Their high-priced lawyer filed a motion to dismiss. My heart hammered against my ribs when I read Amelia's email explaining it. The motion was full of dismissive legal jargon, but the gist was simple. They were arguing that our entire case was baseless. They claimed it was just a simple HOA dispute over bylaws, not a federal issue. They were trying to tell a federal judge that the SCRA didn't apply here, that I was just a disgruntled landlord using my military status to avoid following the rules. It was a bold-faced lie, but it was wrapped in a professional legal document, and it sent a sliver of my old fear right back down my spine. It felt like they were going to squirm out of it, that the system was going to protect them after all. I got on the phone with Amelia, my voice probably a little more panicked than I wanted to admit. Can they do this? Can they just get it thrown out? Amelia actually laughed. It was a sharp, confident sound. Jake, breathe. This is good news. Good news? How is this good news? Because it's a weak, desperate move and they just showed us their entire hand, she explained. This is what lawyers do when they don't have a real defense. They try to win on a technicality before the fight even starts. They're hoping we'll get scared and back down. We're not going to back down. We're going to dismantle their motion so thoroughly that the judge will be annoyed they even wasted his time. Just watch. And I did. Over the next 2 weeks, Amelia went to work. She drafted a brief in opposition to the motion to dismiss that was a work of art. It was a legal sledgehammer. She didn't just argue, she systematically took every one of their points, quoted the exact statute from the SCRA that proved it wrong, cited 3 different previous federal cases that set a precedent, and then attached our evidence as exhibits. Exhibit A, my deployment orders. Exhibit B, the email where the treasurer acknowledged my deployment. Exhibit C, the subsequent violation notice sent after the acknowledgement. Exhibit D, the sworn affidavit from the Millers detailing the harassment. She wasn't just telling the judge they were wrong, she was proving with their own words and actions that they had knowingly and repeatedly broken federal law. Her final paragraph was ice cold. It basically stated that the defendant's motion was not only legally baseless, but bordered on frivolous, and was a profound insult to a service member currently deployed in a combat zone. After she filed it, we had to wait. The wheels of justice grind slow, and the waiting was agony. It was weeks of silence, weeks of me wondering if their slick lawyer had found some loophole. Then, one Tuesday morning, an email from Amelia appeared. Subject, we're in the game. The judge had issued his ruling. Motion to dismiss, denied. But it was his written opinion that was the real victory. He hadn't just denied it, he'd ripped their argument to shreds. Amelia forwarded me the document. He wrote that the claims brought under the SCRA were of the utmost seriousness, and that the plaintiff's evidence of knowing violation was substantial and compelling. He set a date for discovery to begin. The message was clear. We weren't getting thrown out. The HOA was now officially trapped in a federal lawsuit, and the judge was already on our side. The tide had turned. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. It was at this point that a smart opponent would have waved the white flag and begged for a settlement, but I wasn't dealing with a smart opponent. I was dealing with Karen. Pushed into a corner and stripped of her legal leverage, she did what all cornered bullies do. She got desperate, and she got stupid. Her new plan was to turn my own neighbors against me and get them to fund her war. She called another emergency homeowners meeting. The stated purpose on the flyer, which Mark dutifully photographed and sent to me, was to discuss a special assessment for ongoing and unforeseen legal challenges. She was going to ask the entire neighborhood to pony up cash to pay the lawyers to fight me. She was framing it as an attack on the whole community. This was the mistake Amelia had been waiting for. She's bringing a knife to a gunfight she's already lost, Amelia said when I called her. Here's what we're going to do. The night of the meeting, my property manager, Mark, went as my official proxy. He had his phone set to record audio and a single typed question from Amelia in his pocket. He told me later the room was tense. Karen gave a big, dramatic speech about outside aggressors and malicious lawsuits threatening to bankrupt their community. She painted me as some kind of monster suing my own neighbors out of spite. Then she called for a vote on the special assessment to raise $50,000 for the legal defense fund. Before the vote could happen, Mark stood up. He was nervous, but his voice was clear. Before we vote, he said, reading from the paper Amelia had given him, I have a question for the board. Could you please clarify for the homeowners why the board members, Ms. Peters, Mr. Robinson, and Mrs. Calloway, have been named as individual defendants in this lawsuit? And could you also explain what it means when the lawsuit alleges that you, personally, committed a knowing violation of federal law? Mark said you could have heard a pin drop. Then all hell broke loose. The other homeowners started looking at each other, confused. The narrative Karen had spun, that I was suing them, crumbled in an instant. An old guy in the front row stood up. "Wait a minute," he said, pointing at Karen. "Are you saying he's suing you? Personally? For something you did?" Another woman shouted, "And you want us to pay for your lawyers?" The room exploded. People were on their feet, shouting questions at Karen and the other two board members who looked like they'd just seen a ghost. They weren't angry at me anymore. They were furious with the board for dragging them into a personal vendetta and then having the gall to ask them to pay for it. The meeting ended in chaos with no vote taken. Karen's last-ditch effort had backfired spectacularly. She hadn't just lost the legal battle, she had just lost her army. The war was over. All that was left was to decide on the terms of her surrender. After the chaos of that homeowners' meeting, it was like the dam had broken. The other board members, Bob and the secretary, must have seen the writing on the wall. They realized Karen hadn't been leading them in a noble crusade. She'd been leading them off a cliff. Amelia called me the next morning. I could hear the energy crackling through the phone. "They're in full panic mode, Jake," she said. "The HOA's lawyer has called my office 3 times already this morning. He's talking about a potential resolution. They're ready to fold." "So we take the deal?" I asked, my heart starting to race. "No," Amelia said sharply. "We don't take the deal. We don't even listen to the deal. Right now, they think this is just a legal problem. We're about to show them it's a public relations catastrophe. Their internal support is gone. Now we obliterate their external support. Are you ready for phase 2? I was. Amelia had already vetted a reporter, a guy who wrote for a major online publication that focused on military affairs. He had a reputation for being tough but fair. The next day, I found myself on a scheduled satellite call talking to a journalist. Amelia had prepped me. "Just tell the truth, Jake," she'd said. "Be calm. Be professional. This isn't about revenge. This is about a deployed soldier whose rights were violated. Let the facts speak for themselves." And that's what I did. For an hour, I walked him through the whole story, from the dog on my lawn to the screaming on my porch to the federal lawsuit. I didn't embellish. I didn't have to. The simple, unvarnished truth was damning enough. The article came out 2 days later. The headline was simple: "While he served his country, his HOA declared war on his home." The story didn't just make waves, it was a tsunami. At first, it was just shared within military circles. I started getting emails to my personal account from other soldiers, sailors, and Marines around the world, all telling me to stay strong and sharing their own smaller horror stories about HOAs. But then it broke containment. A local TV station in my hometown ran a segment on it. They showed a picture of me in my uniform next to a picture of Karen they must have pulled from the HOA website. They interviewed a few of my neighbors who were now falling all over themselves to talk about what a wonderful, quiet man I was, and how shocked they were by the board's actions. From my dusty corner of the world, I watched it all unfold in a surreal daze on my laptop. I saw clips of my own front door on national news shows. Commentators were talking about it, expressing their outrage. People online were calling it a disgrace. Without us ever having to orchestrate it, a simple phrase began to attach itself to the story. "They stand with Captain Riley." The public pressure was immense. The final blow, however, came from a direction I never expected: the HOA's insurance company. Amelia called me, and this time she was laughing. "You are not going to believe this," she said. "The carrier just invoked a clause in the HOA's policy that allows them to take over the case to mitigate exposure. They've fired the HOA's lawyer. They've told the board to shut up and not talk to anyone. Their top claims adjuster wants to meet with me tomorrow. It's over, Jake. Checkmate." The negotiations, if you can call them that, took less than a week. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a surrender. The insurance company's only goal was to make the lawsuit and the terrible publicity go away as quickly as possible. They agreed to every single one of our demands. The final settlement was a thing of beauty. Every fine the HOA had ever levied against me was to be refunded with interest. The bylaw amendment they had passed to target me was to be formally and publicly rescinded at the next meeting. They were to pay every cent of my legal fees, including the full, ridiculous bill for my first lawyer, Henderson. They were to pay a substantial sum in compensatory damages to me for the financial stress, and a separate, equally substantial sum directly to Tom and Emily Miller for the emotional distress and harassment they had endured. And finally, the HOA was required to post a formal, public apology to me and the Millers on the homepage of their website for a period of no less than 1 year. As for Karen, her fate was sealed. The insurance carrier, as part of the settlement, had made it clear that their coverage would be voided if the instigating parties remained in power. Bob and the secretary had already resigned. Karen was forced out in disgrace. She became a ghost in her own neighborhood. The last I heard from a chatty Mark was that she'd put her house on the market. Nobody wanted to buy it. Months passed. The noise died down. The lawyers finished the paperwork, and my tour came to an end. The flight home was the longest of my life. I wasn't just returning from a deployment, I felt like I was returning from 2 wars. As the taxi turned onto my street, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. What would it feel like? Would it still feel like mine? The house looked perfect. The lawn was green. The porch was clean. As I stepped out of the cab, the front door opened. Tom and Emily came out, and Emily was holding a small bundle in her arms. Their baby. A little girl. Tom walked right up to me and shook my hand, his grip firm. "Welcome home, Jake," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and thank you." Emily just smiled, tears in her eyes. We kept the place warm for you." It wasn't a big crowd. There were no banners. It was better than that. It was real. One of my neighbors from across the street came over and sheepishly apologized for not getting involved sooner. The new interim HOA president, the old retired guy who cared about the pool, came by to personally welcome me home and shake my hand. Tom handed me the key. I took it, the familiar weight of it cool in my palm. I walked up the steps of my porch, and put the key in the lock. It slid in smoothly and turned. The door swung open into the quiet, peaceful sanctuary I had fought so hard for. I was home. It's been about a year since I came home. The house doesn't feel haunted by any of it. If anything, it feels more mine than ever before, like a piece of land you had to fight a border dispute over. Once the surveyors leave and the deeds are signed, you appreciate the property lines a little more. I'm sitting out on the deck I built, the one that caused so much consternation. The wood has weathered to a soft, silvery gray. There's a cool drink sweating on the table next to me, and the only sound is the evening song of the cicadas and the distant laughter of kids playing down the street. It's funny. I spent a year sleeping in a place where a loud bang could mean the end of your world, but the most profound sense of peace I've ever felt is right here, in this quiet, boring, suburban backyard. The neighborhood is different now. Lighter. The Liberty Orchards. HOA still exists, but it's a shadow of its former self. The new board is run by that retired guy who just wants the pool to be clean and for nobody to bother him. They mostly just collect the dues and make sure the trash gets picked up. The way it should be. The house Karen lived in, my God, it sat on the market for almost 8 months. Apparently nobody wanted to live in the HOA Karen house, as it became known locally. A young family with a couple of loud, happy kids finally bought it for way under asking price. Sometimes I see them playing in the front yard, and I have to smile. I never saw Karen again. After the news stories and the settlement, she just vanished, became a ghost. I don't hate her. It's hard to hate someone who is so profoundly their own worst enemy. She was a woman with a life full of nothing, so she tried to fill it by wrecking someone else's. In the end, all she wrecked was her own. There's a certain sad, pathetic justice in that. The Millers send me a Christmas card now. Tom finished his residency, and they bought a place of their own a few towns over. The card always has a picture of their little girl, who's growing up fast. In their last note, Tom wrote that their new neighborhood doesn't have an HOA. Lesson learned, he wrote. I know what he means. After all the dust settled and the money from the settlement landed in my bank account, I was left with a strange problem. After paying off Henderson and giving a hefty bonus to Amelia and her firm and covering all my own costs, there was still a lot left over. It felt like blood money in a way. I couldn't in good conscience just pocket it and pretend the whole thing was a windfall. So I called Amelia. We talked for a while, and I pitched her an idea that had been forming in my mind ever since that conversation with Master Sergeant Davis. A few weeks later, we established the Sentinel Fund. Working with her firm, I used the settlement money to create a legal defense fund specifically for deployed service members who are getting screwed over back home. Whether it's a predatory HOA, a dealership trying to repossess a car illegally, or a landlord locking a military spouse out, this fund gives them what I didn't have at the beginning, a real lawyer, a shark like Amelia, right from day one, at no cost to them. It's the best thing I've ever done. We've already helped a handful of guys, and the feeling that gives me is better than any legal victory. It's turning the poison into medicine. I guess the whole ordeal changed me. I used to think that the world mostly ran on common sense and decency. I thought if you followed the rules and did the right thing, you'd be fine. I learned that the world runs on leverage, and sometimes the only way to deal with a bully who's using the rulebook as a weapon is to know the rules better, and to find a bigger, sharper weapon of your own. I take a sip of my beer and lean back in my chair. The sun is setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The maple tree I planted is a little taller now. The grass is green. It's just a house, just a little square on a big map, but it's my square, and it's peaceful. And after everything, I finally understand that peace isn't something you're just given. It's something you have to be willing to fight for.